also I'm hoping that, maybe as a community we can try and come up with a modern design language that respects users. I started with Aqua because that was the pinnacle in the same way that when, architects, when they wish to convey some kind of gravity, they will evoke, the structures of socialist era Eastern Europe, or the structures of the classical era in the Mediterranean. It's not necessarily the case that those are the design languages of today, but when what we have today has been so degraded and corrupted and decayed, sometimes you want to start from a point of inspiration that was futuristic and spoke to some kind of great aspiration of humanity.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Kodsnack. I'm Fredrik, as usual, and today I have Jon with me.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, so what do you do on the sort of work side of things?
So I'm an associate professor of computer science at the University of Cambridge, and I'm a fellow of Clare College. So I teach and do research and watch over kids who are trying to learn computer science and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And the more I read up before the episode, the more I realized that whole section is something I would like to do an episode of its own about, and about your research topics. So I guess we probably won't get into that much today. We'll see. But you've also done something else that, sometimes you just come across something on Mastodon or wherever you hang out, and that just makes you happy. And this was definitely one of those things. Yeah. What is it you have created?
So I made a little Swift library for Mac OS called Aqua UI. And I guess this is what put me on your radar. It's a love letter to the design language that Apple introduced in the early 2000s for Mac OS X.
Yeah.
That was a very different era, coming out of the kind of Spartan visual appearances that people had been used to in the past. But I always, I wasn't a Mac user at that time. At home, I was a Windows user, and in school, we had dozens of very, very old Macintosh computers that they must have got some kind of a deal on. So I actually never got to use one of those in the early 2000s, but I just remember how beautiful it was. And it wasn't just the visual appearance. For those of your listeners who are perhaps too young to even have seen this, the visual design was these like almost like globules of beautiful blue liquid that would pulsate and have reflections and shadows and so on. And
it was lit from the inside, sort of.
yeah. This is something that no one really had ever seen before, I guess. And there was just something so futuristic and inspiring about that. And I feel that a lot has changed over the years. The design languages have changed, and not all for the better. Of course, there's been differences in how things look, but also changes in how things work, which perhaps is the more important part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to bring it back. I don't know if it's realistic to bring back the past, and maybe we shouldn't try and bring it back, but I wanted to play around with that idea.
Yeah, I mean, it's always worth, researching the past at least, and seeing how things went and how they worked or were thought about and everything like that. I mean, because I wasn't quite a Mac user back when Aqua debuted, at least. But I remember when I was at university, I walked into some, side room of the main computer room, and they had a Mac, I guess maybe a G3 or G4 or something like that, set up with this enormous screen. It must have been like 24 inches or something.
Yeah.
And then, one of the default Aqua backgrounds, the blue swirls and stuff, and this huge dock, and the icons were so enormous and so detailed. And I mean, I guess I must have been using maybe Windows XP at that point, at most. Mm-hmm. Or maybe even Windows 98 still. I'm a bit fussy on the time, but I mean, the differences were huge. Nothing looked like it. So yeah, we'll have plenty of links for people who wonder what we're talking about in the show notes.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. It's been preserved pretty well what it looked like, because
Yes.
I mean what we have now on the Mac is, I mean you can definitely see the relationship, but it's been scaled or toned down so much. I guess is my main feeling. I feel like maybe the dock is the thing that feels the least distant.
Yeah. It's interesting. You know, you mentioned like a 24-inch screen or whatever, which was enormous at that time. But you know, now our screens are much larger, and the pixel density is unfathomably.
It's outrageous.
and somehow, if you look at the kind of designs like those icons you mentioned from back then, they were so much more detailed, and that detail, it could be achieved on a screen with such low density.
That's
and you know, today, you know, the icon, that they're all the same shape. There's no depth, and they all kind of look the same.
They're removing detail.
Yeah. And it didn't just happen to the Mac. It also happened on the phone. I was trying to remember. I think my first iPhone was must have been an iPhone 4. I think it might have been the first one that had this kind of square edge. Yeah.
That sounds right.
Yeah. And so at that time, it was the era of, not Aqua, of course, but a completely different but very detailed design language that was used on there. And maybe I didn't appreciate it enough at the time, but around the transition to iOS 7, which was the great flattening of everything.
Yes.
That was toward the end of my career as an iOS developer. I think that happened in the year that I stopped working on that. But it did not take long for me to become completely unable to use my phone.
Ouch.
And so I don't remember what year that was, in 2014 or something like that. And so it has been a decade that I have no longer had any concept of where anything is on my phone. And I open every app, not just some apps, every app by searching. I pull down and I use the search thing. That is how I open every single app.
Yeah, me too.
And it's what an unbelievable user interface regression. And people today are too young to even know that there was a time when you could know where your camera was, or what the difference between your calendar and your photos was.
Yeah, exactly. And things stayed where they were. And and it feels so strange as well, because it really does feel, like you said, like a regression of so many things. I mean, I'm not the only one who sometimes, rediscover a link to Apple's old human interface guidelines.
Yeah.
And everything is so thought through and well put together. And I'm pretty sure that if I put up together an app today, whether on the Mac or on the iPhone, or some other platform for that matter, maybe an Android app, and followed the old guidelines, I would come up with something that looked and worked really well today as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And people were at least it feels like people were following them more thoroughly, more frequently.
Yeah.
So things looked and worked in similar ways, and you discovered things because this is how it usually works. And I feel like that's going gradually downhill.
Yeah. I mean, even something like knowing what parts of a window you can safely grab. Or what will happen if you do? Like, can you resize it from here? Or this is gone. And it used to be the case that the toolbar icons in apps that people made, and also Apple's own applications, were detailed enough that you could turn off the text underneath the icons and you could still use the app. You can't do this anymore. You turn off the text when you want to take a screenshot, and then when you want to use the app, you have to put the text back on. But Apple doesn't believe that anyone is using the text and you can tell this because some of the standard buttons, like the button to hide and show a sidebar, or what used to be called a source list in the old days, the text is hide sidebar, and so this causes the button to become like an inch and a half long when when you have the text on.
It's outrageous.
So it's, I really, I feel powerless today when I'm using the computer, because so many things are, it's not easy to do anymore. And, most of all, what it reminds me of, the design direction that has been pursued, it reminds me of the way so I'm also an old time, Linux user and customizer and so on. And, people in that world, it's almost like a demo scene or something. People in this world, they create the most unusable but kind of visually beautiful things that are possible, and
yes,
they make it so that you can't tell what anything is, but maybe you have some empty space and different parts of the empty space correspond to doing different actions or something. And it's so beautiful, but and it's maybe it must feel really good to use it once you've become an expert in remembering where the thing would have been if you had displayed it. And it reminds me of that kind of ethos, something that a creative person might do to their own environment, just for the sake of doing it because it's fun or exciting or whatever. But somehow this is what has happened to the interfaces that everyone is supposed to use.
Yeah.
Even people who don't think of that as a hobby.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels like sometimes it might be in the name of making the interface look more clean, as if that made things easier in the long run. I mean, sure, it looks like you can't do anything, but if you have to hunt around to find stuff, it doesn't really help anyone. It doesn't help a new user, and it definitely doesn't help a power user.
So it's interesting. Like, how does this happen, and what can be done about it? Every time there's some change in, whether it's Apple or some other consumer thing that a lot of people use, maybe it's WhatsApp or whatever. And lots of users, like normal people, not like us, but like normal people will, they'll start texting all their friends, like, don't upgrade, it's no good anymore. Like my dad called me, he called me last week and said, I'm not upgrading to iOS 18. They messed up the photo app. And I had upgraded, and he's right. They did mess up the photo app. But the thing is, there's nothing we can do about it. Like, you can't not upgrade because everything is completely integrated. If you don't upgrade, then soon you won't be able to access like the internet. Exactly. That's what will happen. So I don't know what to do about that, but it's just it feels like we're kind of along for the ride.
Yeah, I mean, it's also weird. I haven't thought about this until we started talking, but in this time that they've been sort of removing buttons and making things look less clear, to put it from my point of view, average computer like savviness must have gone up tremendously.
Yeah,
I mean, the average user of a Mac in 2002 must have known much less about computers than the average Mac user today, right? Shouldn't they have been able to make, or maybe there are just so many more people have come in that maybe every Mac user in 2002 was actively interested in the Mac for the sake of the Mac, perhaps.
Maybe you had to have been. So.
Yeah, exactly. Nobody ended up on a Mac by accident. You weren't forced by IT into using a Mac.
Yeah,
I guess.
But I wonder. Like, I think definitely there's aspects of technological savviness that have definitely, obviously gone up. But nowadays, I think that a lot of people's first experiences with, computers is with a tablet or a phone. And, for a lot of people who are not like, they're not like able to afford to buy an expensive laptop or something, but they have to get an expensive phone because all phones are expensive now.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
And like, you need a smartphone in order to be able to have a bank account nowadays.
Yeah, exactly.
So they spend $1,200 or whatever the currency is on a smartphone, and that's what they use. And so what I've heard, it's hard for me to believe. I haven't seen this, but my colleagues keep telling me is the kids don't know how to they don't know what a file is anymore.
Oh yeah, I've heard.
They don't know how to install software. They Um, and I don't know. I mean, my students, the ones that I supervise, they know what a file is. I asked them actually. When I first met them, I asked them, "Do you know what a file is?" Because I was curious. But it must be prevalent for so many people to be talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense as well, because there are so few things you actually do definitely need a desktop or laptop type computer for nowadays. So, I mean, and I heard about, I don't know if you listen to Accidental Tech podcast, but there was talk at some point about someone's son starting his CS education, and he had iCloud desktop sync enabled. And then they started putting all their school projects on the desktop, because that's where you put. And then you had, node modules. That's a lot of files. so iCloud Drive started acting up, completely indecipherable.
Corruption.
Yeah, exactly. It was just choking on all the files, and of course you don't get any messages about it either.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh boy, that's quite a lesson to learn.
It's not easy stuff to solve either. So
no. Yeah.
But anyway, so Aqua UI.
Yeah.
So it's what is it in the library? I guess it's UI components then.
Yeah. So it's not much is in there. In fact, the only thing I've gotten around to doing is I have a subclass of NS Window. And what it does is it will give you a window, but with more detailed traffic light buttons. They're not exactly copied from, any particular version of Mac OS, but they have some kind of a gradient and some kind of internal lighting and shine and inset appearance. And the other thing that I'm very proud of is probably not many people even remember what this thing did. If they look at a screenshot, what the hell is that thing for? And it's this beautiful button on the right hand corner of the window, and it's shaped like a pill. Like a long-lasting ibuprofen or something. And when you click it, the toolbar disappears, and you click it again, and the toolbar comes back. Apple, that upper right corner, they have a long history of messing around with that thing. I think in the first public betas of Mac OS X, there was a very beautiful but bizarre purple button.
Oh yeah, I've seen a video of that.
Have you seen that? Yeah. Yeah. I guess it's a single window mode or something.
Yep.
You see, it's kind of like what do they call it now? Stage manager. In the current Mac OS. I'm not sure which one is worse, honestly. But...
no, because the single window stage manager, that's the purple button. It's easy to understand what's going on.
Yeah, so I don't remember when they maybe after the beta. I don't know when they replaced that with the cool toolbar toggle button, but that's a great button. And then I think in must have been Lion. Was that 10.7 or something when they replaced it with the full screen button.
That's what took the place. Yeah.
Yeah. What a shame that was. The full screen, to me, is the most overrated feature to ever occur on screens that are like bigger than my wingspan.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, and I never liked the implementation of it as well.
Yeah.
I feel, I mean, there are things you can have a use for having full screen, but it's... no, it's not for me. It's apparently for a lot of other people, but not for me.
Yeah. Well, it's like, oh, great. Now I have I got my website in there, and I have to turn my head to view, to read the text, or if someone had enough mercy to set a max width on the column, then I can have the website in the upper left-hand corner of my screen, and all the beautiful unsullied white space everywhere else.
Yeah, exactly. White space above all. That's how we use it.
Yeah.
And you can't.
We don't want to be distracted by content.
No. The horror.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, it's actually funny. I've been thinking more about how I use how I use my computer, like the past year or so, and I found myself actively starting to use more windows,
Hmm.
like having more windows more spread out on the screen, and also a bit fewer tabs.
Yeah.
So I'm moving very actively in the other direction, and
Yeah.
I feel like that's not a common thing, but it makes better use of the screen.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that in the old days, people used to organize their workspace in a very specific way that was, okay, it's useful for this to be over here. I look at it there. I look at this thing down here, and I can easily get between them. In fact, the Finder actually used to work this way too.
Yeah.
I was playing around with what's that? There's an amazing website where you can go in there and you can run like Mac OS 9 and Mac OS
Oh
8.
yeah. I don't recall the name, but I remember it. We'll
Yeah,
link it in for people.
yeah, put it in the show notes. But I was
Yeah.
playing with that, and in the old Finder, you when you double click a folder, it first of all it opens a new window. Okay, maybe that's not a big deal, but somehow the new window is linked to the old one in some way because the icon remains highlighted, the one that you clicked on, and when you close the window, the window disappears into the icon that it came from. So there's that, and then there's also the fact that um, rather than, I think most people today will set their file manager to just kind of auto arrange everything, and they'll put it in these sections and columns or whatever it is they're doing. In the old days, people would even move around the file icons to be exactly where they wanted them to be.
Yeah.
And now I think, maybe that was a bit too chaotic, but now we've swung so far in the opposite direction where nothing is good enough unless it's completely out of our hands.
Yeah, exactly. And it's sorted by AI or something.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah. What will be sorted on top? You never know.
Yeah. Don't give them any ideas.
No, I'm sorry. I regret everything. No, and I think the other thing that easy to forget about that old Finder was that not only was it just one window that kept the link to the other window, a certain directory only had one window ever.
Yeah.
So you never had two things. You never had a confusion about where it was. So you placed a window somewhere and you sorted the icons or moved them, and they were always there the same way when you opened that directory. It was a different thing, and it doesn't. It doesn't quite work out with how Finders and browser style works now.
Yeah, it's interesting. All those things. You look back at them, and I'm not sure that one would choose to bring them back in the same way today.
No.
The world has changed, and we have experience with various ideas and so on. But it's interesting to see how much thought was put into how things worked back then.
Yeah,
that's a lot less nowadays, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, for one thing, I miss that. And for another, I feel like there should be room out there in the sort of competition of ideas for someone to really think deeply about these things again and sort of make a UI, make an operating system for that matter, that really thinks and cares deeply and has like strong ideas about it, or and see what comes out of that. Like you said, experimenting with extreme UIs to see, of course this doesn't work, but it looks beautiful. But maybe there's an idea in there that does work and can be used and can be useful. More of that, please.
Yes.
A quick but huge thank you to everyone sponsoring us on Ko-fi. You too can become one of them by surfing to ko-fi.com/KODSNACK. Kodsnack, and giving us either a one-time donation or monthly support. If you support us on the coffee drinker level of €5 per month or more, you get a bunch of very nice stickers in your actual physical mailbox. And if you support us on the barista level for €10 per month or more, you also get a thank you right here. Big thanks to Albin Groen, Svante Richter, Anders Legell, Brother Ingo, and Tobbe Lundberg. Everyone who supports us helps make the podcast possible, and the more of you there are, the better we can make the podcast. We do sometimes have sponsors, but it's actually your support which is making it possible to cover our monthly costs. And if you want to support us in other ways, you can, of course, give the podcast a review in your podcast player. That also helps a lot. Give it a thumbs up, a star, write a comment, or whatever your player supports. Or, of course, simply tell someone who might like the podcast about an episode. And remember, you're a fantastic person, whether you support us or not.
I was encouraged to see, but then maybe a little discouraged after I looked into it. There's something called Elementary OS. Have you seen this? It's a Linux distribution, and it looks like they were putting a lot of thought into things. But
Oh yeah.
when I started to look at the designs, and they have their own human interface guide, but I'm afraid that it seems to be more just copying a lot of design trends that have occurred during the decline of macOS.
That's not good.
The trend, for example, of the toolbar becoming the title bar. So now there's nowhere that you can drag in the title. Well, who cares? Who knows what the title of the dang thing
Yeah,
is?
exactly.
Or the sidebar, the source list eating into the window Chrome. So now there's even less space for the toolbar.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that they're innovating and thinking carefully about the design to a bigger extent than occurs in most Linux-based distributions. But I think that now is the time to be a bit bold and try and do something that's really new.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I have to mention that Aqua UI, it also has the scroll bars.
Yes, I spent a while creating that.
Yeah,
that was sitting in my living room. My wife on her break as well is watching Grey's Anatomy reruns or whatever, and I'm sitting there working on the scroll bar, and I keep pausing it. Look at this, So first I got the the long the tube, they call it the knob. And I got that thing with the a passable gradient, but it just looked kind of like a big old blob. And then I got the what they had back then was this kind of wave pattern going up the scroll bar, and I figured that it's actually very easy to do this. You first make like a black and white gradient that just repeats a gradient pattern, and then you just place it underneath. And clip it. And so that looked pretty good, but what it looked like was, a 2006 era Linux, GTK theme, where it's like, it looks, if you zoom in on that, it looks correct in the screenshot, but then when you move it, it doesn't work correctly because the people from that era remember that the Aqua scroll bar on the Mac, the gradient was stationary. The scroll bar moved, but the gradient didn't.
Oh yeah.
Remember that?
True. Yeah.
And so and maybe it was like just like a texture that somehow was on the whole screen, and then and maybe this is at least my mental model of it. Then the scroll bar is just kind of revealing it, within its own bounds or something.
Little window moving across the pattern.
Yeah. And gosh, I remember going to an Apple retailer when I was a kid, and just grabbing the scroll bar and just moving it around up and down, and they were like, "What is he doing?" But I was just moving it around just to look at it. It's a cliche, but I wanted to lick it. You want to like stick a little straw into it and suck it up.
Yeah. People were talking about Aqua looking a bit like hard candy, stuff like that. It was a classic. Yeah, and we should say as well for people who don't know that the scroll bars were always visible back in those days.
Yes.
They didn't hide from you, and it was also proportional. So the larger part of the window was visible, the higher the nice candy part of the scroll bar was, which was also the grab handle for scrolling. So it looked really nice, and it's sort of one of those interface elements that really brings me into like the Aqua mindset.
Yeah.
If you have the window and you have the scroll bar, that rings Aqua in my head.
Yeah. Well, that's why it was enough for those to be the only elements that I implemented, and I made my screenshot and put it on Mastodon.
Exactly.
Of course, I made sure it was animated so you could tell that the scroll bar was authentic.
Oh, yeah. It's like the minimum scrollable product.
Yeah, exactly. So, other elements, there's no obstacle to implementing them, the buttons and the sliders and so on. I'm hoping that people will be inspired and in the same spirit will, start putting those things in. But also I'm hoping that, maybe as a community we can try and come up with a modern design language that respects users. I started with Aqua because that was like the pinnacle. In the same way that when like architects, when they wish to convey some kind of gravity, they will evoke, the structures of socialist era Eastern Europe, or the
Oh, yeah.
structures of the classical era in the Mediterranean. It's not necessarily the case that those are the design languages of today, but when what we have today has been so degraded and corrupted and decayed, sometimes you want to start from a point of inspiration that was futuristic and spoke to some kind of great aspiration of humanity.
Yeah, yeah. So, do you know, because I don't, do you know if there's been stuff, written or produced about the process of designing Aqua in the first place?
That's an interesting question. I did recently read a post by the person who created the original prototype dock that was
Oh, yeah.
demoed at
That
Macworld
was a good
2000.
one.
Maybe we can put that in the show notes.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that was a very interesting one. I also recently saw, I hope I can find it again, a discussion of a very interesting internal tool that they use at Apple. I think it's called Mica. And
Oh.
it's a tool that they use to design the like the animations and the interactions and so
Mm.
on. I think it's basically like a core animation playground or something like this.
Mm.
It's very sophisticated. And I recall, I'm not sure if this is related to that or not, but I recall that in the old days when Aqua was living and being evolved, they had a very sophisticated piece of software that would be used to create the materials that then were
Mm.
stretched out and
Mm.
formed to create buttons and
Yeah,
other elements and so on.
it makes sense.
This stuff is probably, it would be amazing if we could somehow get access to it and play
Yeah.
around with it, but that will never happen.
No, probably not. No, it would
Yeah,
be really interesting to hear how they arrived
yeah,
at, the
yeah,
particular combination of choices,
yeah,
and
yeah,
what the thinking
absolutely.
was.
But I was trying to see how far one could go, and it seems like there's some kind of limitations as far as if you want to make an app with say Aqua UI or something, it can't use there can't be any like web component in there.
Mm.
So I wanted to make an app that would have like some text and a web view or something like that,
Mm.
and unfortunately, as far as I can tell, all the web rendering engines, WebKit, whatever the one that Chrome, Blink,
Yeah.
um, they all draw their own UI elements, and
Ah.
even WebKit. So for example, the,
Oh.
the the scroll view is not an NS scroll view. It's just some
What?
thing that it
Yeah.
does, and I guess it just decides what to make the scroll
Uh,
interface look and feel like depending on the platform. Um,
oh. So
so
as soon
it's
as you throw that in, you
yeah.
get the
Yeah,
Mm.
so that's a real shame. The
Yeah.
old deprecated web view, the
Mm.
not WK web view, but
Yeah.
the old web view still works properly. So you could imagine using that, but you get some warning, oh, don't use this
Yeah.
class. So
I had no idea.
yeah,
I assumed Safari would be doing it the system way.
yeah, no, yeah,
Sorry.
it's so there's limitations on what one can do there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So if I was pulling this into my app,
yeah,
I would replace my NS window with
yeah,
the Aqua window, and then would I get the
that's right.
scroll bars for free then inside that view, or
No.
no?
So AppKit, it's a bit, the framework is not completely consistent in what is needed in order to customize a given element. And
Yeah.
for the window, you basically need to subclass it.
Yeah.
Although to their credit, if you subclass the thing, it's not so hard to customize the traffic buttons. And
Cool.
you can use a title bar accessory to get the toolbar lozenge and
Mm.
so on. So all of that works and is handled by the subclass. For the scroll bars, so the architecture of scroll views in macOS, you have NS scroll view, and then the actual scroller itself is a different view. It's NS scroller, and if you subclass this thing, you can really do anything you want in there. Although there's a lot of strangeness due to the way that scrollers have evolved in the past how many years since
Yeah.
NS scroller was written in NextStep.
Yeah. It's been a while.
But to Apple's credit, and with an NS scroll view, you can actually just set the scroller. So horizontal scroller and vertical scroller are properties of the class, and you can just set them on the existing scroll view. So in Aqua UI, there's a convenience constructor that lets you build an Aqua scroll view, automatically. But if you've got one on your hands that, you didn't build, that someone else built, you can swap out the scrollers as you please.
Cool. So I would need to go in my app and set the scrollers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I need to try this.
Yeah, maybe at least fun for like a personal build.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe not push it on people.
Yeah, I'll be like, what is this?
But really great looking screenshots. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I had to wake up my old 12-inch PowerBook.
Oh, wow. What a beauty.
Yeah, exactly. Scroll. I don't know if the scroll bars show up in the image, but they are there.
Oh, beautiful. I recently, I guess our listeners can't hear this or see this, but I recently, my iPod here, it's a 7th generation. I love it. My wife thinks it's so funny, but it's great. I used to, listen to things on my phone. I use the AirPods Pro with Bluetooth and all of that. And, the phone runs out of batteries and all of that stuff. And, this thing, I just load it up with what I want to be on there and I take it with me. And, well, of course, someone took this apart and then replaced the battery with one that's like 20 years newer and, and enlarged the storage. And so this thing works better than anything ever could have worked in 2006 or 7 or whenever this was. When I first got it, I did not charge it for a month.
Wow.
and I was using it every day on my commute. And that, this is the thing that drives me crazy, because we have the technology has been, like the hardware technology has been improving by leaps and bounds, but the actual experience of using the technology has not improved, or not until very recently. So I was it 2020 or 2021, I bought an M1 MacBook Air. It was the first of the M1, the Apple Silicon laptops, and it was the best computer I'd ever had. It was also it was also cheaper than
most
yeah. And it still works as well as it did when I got it. I think I'm using an M2 or M3 or something now at work, and I can really not notice the difference between the two of them. But what I do notice the difference between is it was like leaps and bounds ahead of the prior, like the Intel processors that they've been using for a while. Yeah. But so then I did something interesting. I bought a for £50. I bought an old white iMac, one of those it was one of the Intel ones. So not the so it's an old Intel Core 2 Duo iMac running Tiger, and just to play around with it. And I excused the extravagance because I need it for research because I'm making Aqua UI, and I wanted to play around with it, and I had a VM of Tiger that died, so I was like, okay, let me just get the real thing. Anyway, the thing runs quite a bit faster on 2 gigabytes of RAM than I think it was a 16 gigabyte of RAM, much, I don't remember which processor, but obviously much better Intel processor iMac that I bought in 2019. That thing, you do anything and it starts to spin, and the flattened, the deflated beach ball appears.
Exactly.
And so this old computer from 2007 with only 2 gigabytes of RAM and by all accounts, a pretty crappy processor, is running better than a computer from 2019. And how is that possible? It's bloat. The
Yeah.
operating system has become so bloated. The internet has become so bloated. Nothing, what could be done with so little back then now you need, expensive components and rare materials, and
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. And so here I have this iPod from 2007. I can use it for a month without charging it. That's longer than my Kindle lasts.
Yeah.
I can use it for a month without charging it, using it for like an hour every day.
Yeah.
And like to imagine if we could have been living in a world where we still have devices that are as perfect as this one, but they work just a little bit better, and the battery lasts 100 times as long, and they store like 100 times as much media. Like that's the world we could be living in, but instead we have these phones where the battery dies after about, I don't know, between 8 and 10 hours of use.
And they don't store anything on them.
Yeah.
And you need cloud services that get shut down.
Yeah.
And you get notifications when you listen to music.
You get notifications. Yeah. Well, I have to give Apple credit because I actually can still synchronize this on a modern.
Yeah, that's not obviously.
Yes. So iTunes is obviously gone, and the music app is useless. But you can plug this thing in, and it shows up in Finder. And the old pane that used to appear in iTunes, the old pane is now appearing in Finder, and you can synchronize stuff, and it will work with Apple Music, and it will work with the horrible Apple Podcasts app. Huh? It will even work with that. And so that's thank goodness for that. I had been hoping that when I got that old iMac, the ancient one, had been, this will be my iPod hub, I'll set that up and plug that thing in. And then I neglected to realize that, well, obviously to download my podcast, I need to be able to form like an HTTPS connection. Yeah. And you can't do that, obviously, on these old machines. So that dream is a bit of a bust. But at least I can still plug this thing in, and I'll be so angry if they ever remove that.
Hey, can you get a reasonably modern browser on that iMac? Is
Not really.
Building like Firefox or something?
So there were some projects, some of which died, and maybe some of which are being revived. I think there's one called 10.4 Fox, and I think these are oriented to making a browser that can, run on the PowerPC architecture. But ultimately, the problem is that even if you had a modern browser with all the correct ability to, use SSL and everything like that, that is actually something that would be too much for the old hardware. It would. So if you could do it, it would just take too long to decode anything. So that's that ship has unfortunately sailed far beyond where we could ever reach it again.
Yeah, that's sad. So then we're back to installing Linux or something on old machines. We want to.
Yes, I think so.
Or maybe installing a SSH proxy of some kind somewhere.
Yeah, I experimented. I experimented with this a little bit. There's some programs like this one called Charles that is, you can you get both computers on the same Wi-Fi network, and then you have a new computer and you pass all the traffic through that, and it kind of almost works. But unfortunately, many websites are very careful to ensure that they do not allow a connection that is being messed around in this way. So most things you still can't do this with.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Some amount of sense.
Yeah. Although I had thought about maybe what if I just, instead of if I scale back, okay, I don't want to access the whole internet. What if I just want to get my podcasts? Then maybe I set up my own little server that, in my own little network that serves those things, and, so maybe during the summer or something, I'll mess around with that. But I have to go back to work now and do some things that are, not some, Don Quixote type crazy thing.
Yeah, there's a balance in life, they say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's great to take these little detours every now and then. It's good for the soul.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got stuck on the web browser on the PowerBook as well. I tried opening my own website and no, doesn't support HTTPS.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I think is so annoying is okay, I understand that there are many, maybe even most things that you do on the web where it's very important that the connection is secure and that you have some guarantee of the provenance of, what you're getting and so on. But then there's my website and Wikipedia and, whatever else. And none of this, those guarantees are completely unimportant for that. None of this matters. Now, I understand users should have the ability to choose, whether or not they will have a secure connection. And insofar as people who host a website will choose to make it available on HTTP versus HTTPS, all that's good. But I think we have a situation where the browser vendors are de facto forcing people to adopt security measures that may or may not be important in their actual situation. And so if you access, some site through an unsecured connection, you get some terrifying message that someone like you or me knows very well that we should just ignore because it's fine. But someone else is, it's the virus is coming into my computer. Exactly. And, this is, so I think that in some sense we're being forced to actually hobble and disable working technology. Because it's this integration of the modern internet with services, browser vendors, hardware vendors, computer vendors, everything is so interconnected in a way that doesn't serve users. It serves those vendors because it requires people to keep everything up to date, and it serves people who want to limit their own liability, or to put it another way, to launder their liability and put it onto users. Nowadays, okay, when you get insurance or when you enter into a contract, any of these kind of situations, there's two sides to that. On one side, say the insurer, they have to pay out when the, insured event happens, but you have to mitigate against, the possibility of that event happening. And what counts as necessary or reasonable mitigation, that is, a matter of, policy, precedent, law. It changes over time. And I think that a lot of the changes, the user hostile changes that we're seeing, whether it's the enforced switch to secure connections on every part of the internet, or things like multi-factor authentication and two-factor authentication before that. These things are about entities that have a liability that they ought to pay up for because they've entered into such an arrangement, and then they want to push all of the mitigation measures onto the individual user. It's like fire alarms too. I don't know how it is in Sweden, but in the United States, you build a new house and you want to get the thing insured, of course, and so you have to, install fire alarms, which obviously that makes a lot of sense. You want to have a fire alarm. But what I do not want to have is a network of like 10 different fire alarms that are piercingly loud, extremely sensitive, and all go off when one of them goes off. And they are so sensitive that if you are cooking at all without an industrial, without a commercial ventilation arrangement, something that would cost like $10,000 for a restaurant to install, if you don't have one of those, then if you are cooking in your kitchen, you will set off the fire alarm. And everybody in the house, a person who's sleeping, person who is, whatever, they will all have their eardrums blown out. And this is all caused by the fact that people don't, insurance companies don't want to pay up when it comes time to pay up. So now we have to live with this thing where you can't cook and you can't have, you can't have, your eardrums intact. And that's what's happening everywhere. So, I don't know what to do about this, but the trend is not good.
Yeah. We need to complain more, find different ways out. I mean, I don't think we don't have the same ridiculousness of fire alarms here. But the people who lived in this house before we moved in, they liked fire alarms.
You might say they were enthusiasts.
Yeah, exactly. Parts of the house were actually made out of them, I think. So, we had to remove the one in the kitchen pretty early for exactly the reason you said. You open the oven, it's like, oh, there are fumes. Oh, the fire alarm again. And these ones weren't, these were like basic ones, the ones you buy in some kind of utility store. So they, each one ran on its own little battery.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. But the batteries were evidently not changed all at the same time.
Oh, no.
So we had this like a year and a half of, discovering new fire alarms, because from somewhere in the house, there is a beep coming like every 45 seconons or something.
And of course you can't find it, because it sounds like it's coming from any other place.
Yeah, exactly. And the echoes and stuff. If you start thinking about one of those when you're about to go to bed, it's like, no, I have to go up and find it now.
This happened to me recently in my house here in Cambridge. Suddenly I was about to leave the house as a very loud, piercing beep that would happen every 5 minutes. Oh. And I thought I found the source of it, and I demolished the fire alarm. Because, you can't just like turn them off anymore. They don't turn off. You have to completely, wreck them.
Exactly.
And then I heard a beep after that. And so what happened is I had really messed up a perfectly fine working one. And and then it was apparently the carbon monoxide detector that was out of batteries, and God help me,
So. Yeah. Help us all, really. And for those people who might be worried, we do have current fire alarms as well.
Yes.
Just a more reasonable number of them.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. It's so many different kinds of strange interfaces and regressions out there. It's exciting. Yeah, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. Anything else we should say about Aqua or interfaces or whatever else?
Well, I'm looking forward to the Aqua fire alarm. It's free. You don't have to pay me. Anyone can take up that idea.
Yeah, exactly. The alarm.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to schedule another episode someday about
I look forward to that. Yes.
Yeah, that's going to be great fun. Yes. And where should people go if they want to get in touch with you?
Oh, right. Well, you can go to my website at jonsterling.com. We'll link that in the show notes, and find some contact information on there. Or you can, I'm also on Mastodon. It's called Mastodon. That's the server that I'm on. We can put a link to that in the show notes as well if you want to.
Yep, absolutely.
Send me any feedback or tell me why it's very good for fire alarms to be interconnected and extremely loud. So, in fact, maybe I should set up a whole different account for that. And maybe a third account for, SSL is good, actually.
SSL fire alarms.
Yes, that's what I promise I'll monitor those accounts very carefully.
Yeah, of course. That's not going in the spam box.
Yeah. Yeah, but thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much.
Talk.
Yeah, it was great. Tack för att just du lyssnar på Kodsnack. Om du vill stödja oss, varför inte tipsa en bekant om podden? Eller lämna en recension i till exempel iTunes eller något annat ställe där det går att sätta betyg på poddar. Du kan också stödja oss genom att köpa oss en kopp kaffe på Coffee. ko-fi.com/kodsnack. Alla pengar går direkt till att göra podden bättre och trevligare. Du kan också komma och hänga i vår Slack-kanal. Länk finns på kodsnack.se, precis som alla andra länkar och all annan info kopplat till varje avsnitt. Sist men inte minst finns det också en länk till vår Spreadshop-butik där du kan köpa tröjor och andra prylar med kodsnacktryck. Återigen, tusen tack för att du lyssnar. Vi hörs.
Let me put it this way, Mr. Raymer. The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all, by any practical definition of the words, foolproof and incapable of error.